everybody, this is the Amateur Hour Sports Podcast. My name is Jacob, and I'm going to do an episode that was requested earlier in the week talking about the Premier League Player of the Decade. A few days ago, I gave my list for my Premier League Team of the Decade, and then in the comments, somebody requested that I do the Best Single Player of the Decade. So I've been thinking about it for a week, going over some stats, and I've decided on the player I'm going to select. And I think ultimately there are three possible players that you could put in this, up for debate in this question. And all three on Man City, because Manchester City were, I believe, the best team over the course of the decade. They won the most Premier Leagues over the decade, winning 4. Basically taking the Premier League by the scruff of the neck for themselves. They've won the last 2. They won one at the start, one near the middle. And the three players in question for me are Vincent Kompany, Sergio Aguero, and David Silva. In considering Sergio Aguero, I think that too many injuries kind of hampered his ability to be put as the top player of the decade, though I think he's definitely up there. Like I said, I think for Vincent Kompany's sake, it's more or less the same, but I almost chose Vincent Kompany even though he had these injuries because of how important he was for Man City. And I think a lot of Man City fans will look back on the years that they didn't win the Premier League at basically when Vincent Kompany was hurt for majority of the season, Man City were not thriving over the course of that season. And even in seasons where they did win the league, they would be behind when Vincent Kompany was hurt, and then as soon as he got fit again, they would make a charge, win the Premier League. But the player I am selecting is David Silva because he played an immense role in this remaking of Manchester City over the last decade. And I think, like I said in the Team of the Decade episode, that David Silva is the catalyst for success for this Manchester City team. And I think he is the most important player for Man City over the course of the decade, and the most important player and the best player in the Premier League over the last decade. And it's hard to believe that just over 10 years ago, Man City purchased this man for £25 million from Valencia. And just think of the caliber of players that are going for, roughly £25 million at this point in time. I mean, like Harry Maguire cost Manchester United £80 million over this summer. And for $25 million at that time, you could get a guy like David Silva. He had the 4th most appearances of the decade in the Premier League. I think that's a big part of my decision to put him in because he's played so many games for Man City. 297 to be exact in the Premier League. He's behind Henderson on 308, James Milner on 307, and Ben Foster on 306. So 9 behind 3rd place. Still a lot of appearances, but it's what he does with the ball in an attacking sense that is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, even without the stats like assists, goals, chances created, and whatnot, he's still instrumental in the midfield at just creating. But 89 assists over the decade, which is 27 more than any other player. The second place is Christian Eriksen on 62. He scored 57 goals, which is pretty impressive for a midfielder, considering for large parts of the decade, he had to play basically as a left midfielder in a 4-4-2 under Manuel Pellegrini because Manuel Pellegrini was pretty stubborn in playing 4-4-2, and I know a lot of West Ham fans who've had to deal with that over the last couple of years can attest to this. And David Silva also created 768 goal-scoring chances over the course of the decade, which is 173 more than any other player. And that stat is absolutely ridiculous. 768 goal-scoring chances over the decade for his teammates just in the Premier League. He's been absolutely phenomenal. Like I said, I think he's the most important player in this renaissance of Manchester City. 4 titles in the 10 years of the decade. A lot of people make the case that Sergio Aguero is the most important player for Man City, the best player in their history, but I really feel as though David Silva has done more for Manchester City over the course of the decade, and I think that he is more important to the team than Sergio Aguero is because there are a lot of strikers who can score a bunch of goals, and I know Aguero is one of the best at doing it. Like, nothing against Sergio Aguero. I'm have to be pretty nitpicky here, but there are not a lot of guys who can do what David Silva does, and the way he's adapted to the changes in football over the last 10 years. I mean, at the start of the decade, it was all about the 4-2-3-1 formation and his ability to play as the 10th so spectacularly, and even to play on the wing in those types of formations to make room for other players, like when Samir Nasri was around Man City, or when they were playing two strikers under Manuel Pellegrini, being able to shift to the right side or the left side of the attacking midfielder. And then adapting to the change in style where teams now like to play with one holder and 2 8s sitting in front of him in more so a 4-1-2-3 formation. His ability to play in that position has been, it's hugely beneficial to himself and his team to be able to adapt and to be able to be so successful in that position as well. Because, like I allude to a lot, guys like Mesut Ozil not being able to adapt to that change because Mesut Ozil is just a pure 10, and that really doesn't fit the mold of football, especially at the top level, as it used to. And Mesut Ozil is not the player he was at the start of the decade. But David Silva, when it kind of looked like he was kind of waning off a little bit in 2015, 2016-ish, all of a sudden, under Pep Guardiola, just a huge resurgence, especially in that first season under Pep. The first season they won under Pep Guardiola. It was Pep Guardiola's second season in charge, 2017, 2018. He was just so spectacular throughout the course of that season. And with, I think, 3 or 4 seasons in the Premier League over the decade with 10-plus assists, there is no player as special as him over the course of the decade. And it kind of pains me to talk about him like this because I'm a Manchester United fan, but that's the truth. City have bossed the decade, and I think that David Silva is the cornerstone and the pivotal piece of that Manchester City puzzle over the course of the decade. Just every year for 10 years straight, he has been absolutely spectacular, by far leading the decade in assists, like I said. But that will wrap up this episode of the Amateur Hour Sports Podcast. If you disagree with my take on this, I would gladly like to argue with you. You can do that on Twitter or Instagram at AmateurHourPDC. You can comment on YouTube, subscribe if you like the video, follow on Spotify, and we post every single day, so keep coming back for more daily content. We'll see you tomorrow.